My daughter called me 3 times the night she died. I should have answered. I should have ignored the quarterly budget meeting and picked up the phone. But I didn't. I let her calls go to voicemail, thinking it could wait, that life had no urgency for conversations between father and daughter. The first message sounded like Sophie, bright, casual, full of energy. She asked if I wanted to grab dinner, maybe finally see that film she'd been pestering me about for weeks. She laughed when she said it, that quick sharp laugh I can still hear in the quiet of my apartment. She didn't sound like a woman standing on the edge of horror. She sounded alive. The second message was different. Her voice trembled. She said she had found something at work, something she wasn't supposed to see. Sophie had been working as a research assistant in the Vatican's secret archives, cataloging manuscripts no one outside a handful of priests and historians had touched for centuries. And now she had stumbled across something forbidden. She didn't explain what, only that she needed to talk to someone she trusted. I was that person. I should have been there. The third voicemail still wakes me in the night. No words. Just heavy, panicked breathing. 37 seconds of fear, as if something was right behind her, forcing the air out of her lungs. Then silence. Then nothing. By the time I left the meeting and listened, it was too late. Sophie was already dead. A single-car accident on Via dei Cappuccini, less than a mile from the Vatican walls. She had been driving too fast, witnesses said, like someone fleeing from something unseen. The police ruled it an accident, her car hitting a stone wall at 60 miles per hour, no skid marks, no mechanical failure. Just a sudden, violent end to a 26-year-old life. But Sophie wasn't reckless. She checked every lock twice, wore her seatbelt religiously, never texted while driving. She was careful in a way that made other people roll their eyes. The Sophie I raised didn't have accidents. At the funeral, the pews were half empty. Sophie's mother had died when she was 12, and we had no close family left. A few of her colleagues from the archives came. Some university friends. Father Benedetti, one of her supervisors, gave a sermon that painted her as a devoted scholar of history. He used the word dedicated 3 times, as though saying it enough would make it true. Afterward, when the mourners had gone and the church was nearly silent, Benedetti pulled me aside. His eyes darted around, like he was afraid someone else might overhear. "Your daughter was working on something unusual before she died," he said. "What kind of unusual?" He hesitated. She'd been assigned to Sublevel C, medieval manuscripts, mostly theological texts from the 13th century. But her final reports, they had irregularities. References to documents that don't officially exist in our inventory. What kind of documents? His lips thinned. Cartographic materials. Maps. Maps. That word landed in me like a stone dropped into deep water. That night, back in my apartment, I opened a bottle of wine and listened to Sophie's voicemails again, trying to decode what her tone had hidden. That note of terror in her second call, the way she said she had seen something she wasn't supposed to. And the last call, just breathing. Not crying, not screaming, just the sound of someone running out of time. I drank until the bottle was gone and still couldn't escape it. 3 days later, I used my consulting credentials to get into the Vatican archives. For 15 years I'd worked as a historical consultant, mostly on medieval manuscripts from the Crusades, occasionally called to verify authenticity for Catholic institutions. I'd been in and out of those archives enough that the guards knew my name. But Sublevel C required special clearance. The guard at the checkpoint frowned when I asked, until I said I was following up on Sophie's last project. I mentioned irregularities, Father Benedetti's concerns. He hesitated, then checked a logbook and waved me through. Sublevel C was nothing like the pristine archive halls above. The walls were stone, older than the Vatican itself, sweating moisture under humming fluorescent lights. The air smelled of dust, parchment, and something else, something faint and rotten, as if something organic had died down there long ago and been forgotten. Sophie's workstation was still waiting for her. Her desk was cluttered with manila folders, photocopies held down by a brass paperweight shaped like St. Peter's Basilica. Her computer was still logged in, its screen glowing with database entries. Her absence was a wound that hadn't closed. I sat in her chair and opened the first folder. The maps inside were not like the historical atlases I'd studied in my career. They didn't chart kingdoms or oceans or routes of commerce. They charted belief. Spiritual cartographies, monks' diagrams of heaven, purgatory, Eden. Familiar, if eccentric. Medieval men trying to understand the infinite. But the last folder was different. The parchment was real vellum, its edges cracked with centuries. The ink was faded, but legible. At the top, scrawled in Latin, Vera Mappa Infernalis. The true map of hell. This was no allegory. The map was too precise: terrain features, elevations, paths marked with distances and notes in the margins about atmospheric conditions. It read less like theology and more like a traveler's guidebook. A manual for descent. I traced the symbols with my fingertip, cold despite the stale air. Some I recognized, Latin inscriptions of regions, Dantean phrases. Others were unknown, sigils that seemed to shift if I stared too long. Sophie's notes were meticulous. She had translated what she could, cross-referenced obscure medieval sources, even compared symbols to ancient pilgrim graffiti etched into Roman catacombs. But her final page was hurried, her pen pressing so hard the letters nearly tore the paper. The coordinates match. Physical locations in Rome. The map is real. I sat in that stone room, the humming lights flickering above, and realized that my daughter had died chasing something no one was supposed to find. And she had left the trail for me to follow. I should have walked away that night. I should have closed the folder, left sublevel C, and accepted that Sophie was gone. But grief has a way of reshaping logic, and love turns into obsession when there are no answers. I couldn't sleep knowing she had died alone, terrified, believing she had uncovered something real, something monstrous. I stayed in that stone chamber until the lights above buzzed out, until the darkness thickened. I pored over her handwriting, neat and careful except for the last frantic scrawl. She had written about 7 entrances, 7 doorways hidden within Rome itself. All but one marked, sealed, or guarded. But the last. Sophie had underlined it 3 times, porta aperta. Open door. The coordinates she recorded led to a place I recognized. A small church near the Roman Forum, St. Joseph of the Carpenters. I'd passed it a dozen times, never giving it more than a glance. A church so unassuming it almost begged you not to notice. That night, I walked Rome's streets like a pilgrim possessed. Tourists laughed and posed by the Pantheon. Vendors hawked postcards and cheap rosaries. All of them blind to the idea that beneath their feet something ancient breathed. I couldn't stop thinking about Sophie's voice, the fear wrapped in those 37 seconds of breathing. When I reached St. Joseph's, the front doors were locked. A renovation notice taped to the entrance. I circled to the back, past shuttered souvenir shops, and found a delivery door with an old lock. My hands remembered tricks I hadn't used since youth, student nights breaking into locked archives to copy manuscripts I couldn't check out. 3 minutes of silence, and the lock clicked. Inside, the air was colder. Scaffolding leaned across the altar, plastic sheeting veiled the sanctuary in translucent shrouds. My footsteps echoed too loudly. I half expected someone in a hard hat to appear, but the silence pressed heavier the deeper I went. I found the staff door Sophie had marked in her notes. Only staff beyond this point. The Italian warning barely registered as I pushed it open. The stone staircase descended into blackness. I counted each step, just as Sophie had written, 23, exactly. At the bottom, the air was damp, metallic. The walls changed from medieval mortar to something older, Roman stone, rougher and far older than the church above. The basement was no basement. It was a relic. At the center of the chamber yawned a well. Not for water, the opening was too wide, the stones around it carved with symbols I had already seen in Sophie's notes. Sigils that seemed to writhe under the flashlight beam. I leaned over, shining my phone's light downward. Stone steps spiraled into blackness, so deep that the light seemed to be swallowed whole. A well into the earth. A well into somewhere else. But what froze me wasn't the well, it was the folding table next to it. On top, a laptop glowed in screensaver mode. Around it, papers were scattered. I stepped closer, and my chest tightened. The laptop wallpaper flickered with a photograph. Sophie. At her desk in the archives. It was her computer. Her notes were here, her files, her life. Whoever had been in this chamber had carried Sophie's laptop here after her death. My fingers shook as I typed her old passwords, variations of our dog's name, the date of her mother's passing. 4 tries, and the screen opened. Folders lined the desktop, organized in Sophie's meticulous fashion. Research files, manuscript scans, cross-references. But there was one folder I didn't recognize. Its title burned cold, Descent Protocol. I opened it. Her plan unfolded in terrifying detail. Equipment lists, camping gear, atmospheric filters, emergency flares, antibiotics, radiation counters. Notes on survival training for extreme environments. Photocopies of medieval accounts describing scholars who had dared descents and returned with grotesque reports. One Jesuit priest in 1634 who had disappeared for 3 days before reappearing with descriptions of caverns, rivers, climates, even inhabitants. This wasn't metaphor. Sophie had been preparing to descend that well. At the end of her files was a voice memo. My breath caught when I clicked play. Dad, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I wanted to be sure before I pulled you in. The map is real. The entrances are real. I confirmed the coordinates. Cross-checked testimonies, old and new. Hell isn't just allegory. It's a physical place. A geography. A prison you can walk into. But I think the Vatican knows I figured it out. Someone's been moving my files, following me. If something happens, finish what I started. Supplies are in storage unit 47 at Roma self-storage. The keys taped under my desk drawer. Find the truth. For both of us. Her voice broke, and then I heard a car door slam, an engine start. The timestamp matched the night of her death. I sat frozen, listening to the silence that followed, the hollow static of a life cut short. Something had terrified Sophie enough to run. Something had followed her from this chamber back into the Roman night. And somehow, whatever killed her wanted me to find this. I looked back at the well. The darkness waited, patient, like an open mouth. And for the first time, I understood exactly what had killed my daughter. I left the church just before dawn, my heart pounding like I'd trespassed into a dream that refused to dissolve. The streets of Rome were empty, slick with last night's rain, and the city felt older than I'd ever known it, like the stones themselves were whispering. At home, I couldn't sleep. I tore Sophie's notes apart, rereading every detail. My daughter had mapped something impossible and believed it enough to risk her life. She hadn't been reckless, she had been prepared. She had even hidden supplies, carefully, deliberately, as though she knew she might not return. I had to see them. That afternoon I drove to Roma self-storage. The unit was easy to find, number 47, a gray metal door with peeling paint. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock. The smell that greeted me was unmistakable, canvas, dust, and something sharp, like metal that had been left too long in the damp. Inside were neat stacks of equipment, climbing harnesses, ropes, waterproof containers, survival rations, chemical light sticks, medical kits. A Geiger counter lay in its box, the batteries still sealed. My daughter had prepared not like an academic chasing fantasy but like an explorer about to descend into a hostile world. In the corner sat a single journal. Sophie's handwriting filled its pages, page after page of careful documentation. But the last entry was scrawled, crooked. They know. They moved the map. Someone whispered my name when no one was there. If I don't make it, Dad will. He'll see. He'll understand. I sat on the cold cement floor, holding her words in my hands. The grief was an anchor, but beneath it, something darker stirred. Curiosity. The same need for understanding that had driven Sophie. The same hunger for answers that had haunted me my entire career. I carried her equipment back to my car, loaded it in silence, and drove toward St. Joseph of the Carpenters. The well waited. By the time I returned, night had fallen. The streets were hushed, shadows stretched long across cobblestones. I parked in an alley and slipped through the same delivery door. The air in the church basement was heavy, damp with stone-born cold. The well loomed in the center like a black wound. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the bottom. The symbols carved around its rim shimmered faintly, as though wet. Purification tablets, antibiotics, a Pope-blessed compass from some Vatican archive she'd managed to access. Each item was methodical, logical. But together, they spelled madness. A rope harness, clipped to an anchor she'd already drilled into the stone floor. A headlamp. A recorder. The silence pressed in, thicker than the walls. I strapped the harness around my chest and tightened it until the leather bit into my ribs. My fingers lingered on the compass, the artifact Sophie had risked her position to obtain. The medieval accounts claimed it always pointed toward the surface, no matter how twisted hell became. The needle twitched faintly, restless, as though aware of where I stood. I walked to the edge of the well. My breath misted in the air. And I began to climb down. The first steps were ancient stone, worn smooth as if thousands of feet had already taken this path. My headlamp lit only a few feet ahead, the rest swallowed in black. I counted aloud, Sophie's voice in my memory urging me to keep track, always keep track. At step 50, the air turned metallic, tinged with iron. At step 100, the walls narrowed, close enough to brush my shoulders. At step 200, my ears popped, the pressure shifting, as though I'd left the world behind. At step 300, the stairs ended. I stood on a broad platform, carved from stone that didn't match any era I knew. It stretched into a cavern so vast that my light dissolved into nothing before finding walls. The silence was absolute. No echo. No drip of water. Not even the faint hum of earth shifting. Just silence so pure it rang in my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. I pulled out Sophie's map. According to her notes, this was the threshold. The place where the physical world ended, and something else began. From the platform, 7 tunnels branched into darkness. Each marked with symbols that glowed faintly under my light. Rage. Envy. Gluttony. Wrath. The sins carved as paths. The air pressed against me, thick and expectant. Sophie's notes said the safest path, the lesser danger, was the tunnel of wrath. Direct, predictable. The envious deceived. The gluttonous devoured. But the wrathful only struck. I stood on that platform, map trembling in my hands, and felt what Sophie must have felt, a truth so absurd it couldn't be ignored. This wasn't metaphor. This wasn't allegory. It was a geography. And my daughter had already walked these steps. I lingered at the threshold longer than I should have, the 7 tunnels gaping like hungry mouths. Each symbol above them seemed alive, faintly pulsing when my light touched the carvings. Wrath. Envy. Gluttony. The rest swallowed in angles of stone my lamp couldn't quite reveal. My hand hovered over Sophie's map, her neat handwriting circling wrath with the words, most direct. Most survivable. Most survivable. I whispered it to myself, as if the words alone could shield me from the dread crawling up my spine. My daughter had trusted this path, or at least believed it would kill her slower than the others. The tunnel sloped downward, the air changing with each step. It grew warmer, heavy with condensation that beaded on the stone walls and made my grip slick. The floor angled so steeply that my boots scraped for purchase. My headlamp beam cut a narrow swath ahead, but beyond that was nothing, an endless press of dark. The silence didn't last. At first it was subtle. A faint echo, like someone's breath caught in the narrow bends. Then the sound sharpened, whispers, not words but suggestions of language. I told myself it was the stone shifting, water dripping unseen. But as I walked, the whispers thickened, layered voices bleeding into one another. Some pleading. Some furious. Some weeping. I stopped, my chest hammering. Who's there? My voice cracked, too loud against the tunnel's ribs. The whispers hushed, like a crowd holding its breath. And then, from deeper ahead, 3 figures emerged. At first, they were silhouettes, shadows moving against shadows. Then the lamp beam caught them, 3 human shapes, gaunt and colorless. Their skin was gray, their clothes in tatters, as though centuries had worn them thin. They stopped in a triangle, regarding me with solid black eyes that reflected no light. I tightened my grip on the compass, half ready to run. One of them stepped forward. His accent was rough, his English strange but clear. A living man. How long has it been since we've seen a living man? My throat tightened. Who are you? I was a soldier. Union Army. Antietam, 1862. He gestured to the others with a trembling hand. Marie, French Revolution. Yeppy, Venice Plague. The names struck me like blows. Centuries between their deaths, yet here they stood, locked together in a cavern beneath Rome. Time moves differently here, the soldier continued. We've been arguing for decades whether the war ended. Did it? Yes, I whispered. The Civil War ended. 1865, the Union won. Relief washed across his face, an echo of humanity softening the black eyes. Thank God. I told them. I told them Lincoln would see it through. The woman, Marie, spoke next. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping against stone. Are you here to take us home? I thought of Sophie's voice memo, her desire to bring people back. Her conviction that this wasn't just about exploring, it was about rescuing. Maybe, I said. I'm looking for someone first. My daughter. Dark hair, young, carrying equipment. She would have come through 3 months ago. They exchanged glances, and then Yeppy spoke. We saw her. She passed here. Brave girl. Too brave. She went deeper, to the circle of violence. My pulse stopped. Violence. Why? Marie shook her head. She was looking for someone. She said the name softly, like a prayer. But she never returned. The soldier stepped closer, his expression grim. You should not follow. The violent dead, they do not forget how to kill. That circle consumes even the living. But my choice had already been made. Sophie had walked that way. I would follow. Which tunnel? I asked. The soldier lifted a bony arm, pointing to a narrow opening I hadn't noticed. Its carving was jagged, shaped like weapons. The smell wafting from it was coppery, sharp, like blood. Follow until you hear the river, he said. The river of blood. But beware, the ferryman does not work for free. I slung my pack higher, the compass trembling faintly in my hand. The 3 figures watched me, silent now, their black eyes reflecting my lamp like pits of ink. As I stepped into the tunnel of violence, Marie's voice followed me, almost tender. If you make it out, tell the others. Tell them they were not forgotten. The tunnel narrowed quickly, my shoulders brushing stone. The air turned hotter, tinged red as though every breath burned my throat. The walls bore carvings of battles, torture, massacres, scenes from every age of human cruelty. Roman legions skewering enemies, knights hacking down peasants, men in modern uniforms with rifles and tanks. My headlamp beam turned pink in the air, as if filtered through blood. Somewhere ahead, water, or something like it, moved with a slow, sticky sound. The river was waiting. The tunnel spat me out onto a ledge, and I froze. Below stretched a river, but not of water. The surface was sluggish, dark red, and carried the unmistakable stench of iron. Blood. An entire river of blood winding through the cavern like some grotesque artery. The sound of it wasn't right either, it pulsed, slow and heavy, like circulation through a body far larger than the world itself. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. Sophie's notes had mentioned it, the phlegathon. The river of boiling blood. I had thought it metaphor. Standing there, staring into that endless crimson tide, I knew it wasn't. Across the river loomed a city. Its towers twisted upward into the cavern roof, black stone spires riddled with windows that flickered with torchlight. Bridges crisscrossed impossible heights, walls bent like frozen waves. And from within its streets came the unmistakable sound of war, clashing steel, guttural cries, the endless thunder of violence with no victor. The circle of violence. Something splashed upstream. I turned sharply, my hand fumbling for the compass as a boat slid into view. It wasn't built of wood. Its hull was bone lashed together with sinew, and it glided over the blood like it had no weight at all. At its prow stood the ferryman. He was tall, too tall, impossibly thin. His skin gleamed like polished obsidian, smooth as glass, and his robes were the kind of black that hurt to look at, as if it were an absence of color altogether. His face. I can barely describe it. Not featureless, but wrong, as though the idea of human had been copied and blurred. When he spoke, it was the grinding of stone against stone. Passage. My throat was dry. What's the cost? The ferryman's head tilted, and I swear I heard the echo of Sophie's voice in the silence before he answered. Years. Living years. 4 for safe crossing. I remembered the soldier's warning, the ferryman does not work for free. I gritted my teeth. 3. The ferryman's obsidian mouth did not move, but his answer rattled through my bones. 4. Or you swim. I thought of Sophie somewhere in that impossible city, trapped or worse. For years was nothing compared to eternity. I swallowed the bitter taste of surrender. Deal. The moment I stepped onto the bone boat, something cold ripped through me. It wasn't just a chill, it was a theft. My muscles sagged, my bones ached, and a deep weariness settled into me that hadn't been there seconds before. I had aged. For years gone, ripped out of me like pages torn from a book. The ferryman's voice echoed again. Paid. We drifted across. The river stank of rust and salt, and beneath its surface shapes swam, too large, too fast, too grotesque to be fish. At one point, something with a pale hand pressed against the blood's surface as though it wanted to break through. Then it sank again. When the boat scraped against the opposite pier, I stumbled out, knees weak. The ferryman did not follow. He simply pushed the vessel back into the current, his black silhouette vanishing into red mist. Ahead stretched the city. Its streets were war zones, every corner consumed by conflict. Souls, gray-skinned and black-eyed, slaughtered each other with whatever weapons eternity provided. Roman legionnaires clashed with Visigoths, Napoleonic soldiers fired muskets into crowds of screaming peasants, modern men in combat fatigues fired rifles that never ran dry. When one fell, the body dissolved, only to reform and return to battle moments later. War without end. I kept to the shadows, moving between shattered archways and broken walls. The compass needle trembled in my palm, always pointing backward, always toward the world above. It reassured me I could still return. At the city's heart, a tower rose above the chaos. A spiral of black stone twisting into the cavern roof like a blade. Sophie's notes had circled it again and again, Tower of Wrath. Her last coordinates ended there. The closer I came, the more dangerous it grew. In the courtyard before the tower, 2 armies battled endlessly. Roman legionnaires locked in perpetual combat with Visigoth warriors, their screams blending with the clash of steel. I waited for a gap, heart hammering, then sprinted across. I almost made it. A Visigoth spotted me, a brute with a rotted battle-axe. He roared and swung, the blade whistling through the air. I dropped, the axe grazing my pack, and rolled across broken cobblestones. When I turned, he was charging again, black eyes burning with eternal bloodlust. 2 armored guardians at the tower entrance noticed. They raised swords that burned with pale fire. But instead of blocking my path, they turned their fury on the Visigoth. His axe slammed into one's shield, sparks flaring, and they forgot me instantly, consumed by the only language they knew, violence. I slipped past, my heart in my throat, and plunged into the tower. Inside was a spiral ramp circling upward. Cells lined the walls, each one a cage of screaming souls. Murderers, torturers, tyrants, each shrieked and clawed at the bars, their rage thick enough to taste in the air. They begged for weapons, for freedom, for something to kill. The sound pressed against me, pounding in my skull. And then, halfway up the spiral, I stopped. Because in one of the cells, sitting against the bars with her head bowed, was Sophie. Her eyes lifted when she heard me, and for one terrifying moment they were black. But then, flickers of brown. Familiar, human brown. My daughter's eyes. Dad. Her voice cracked. My chest nearly caved in. Sophie. Oh, God. I found you. She shook her head violently. No. You shouldn't be here. You can't get me out. The guardian won't allow it. What guardian? Her eyes darkened, the black returning like spilled ink. When she spoke again, her voice was low, animal. The one who holds the key. The one who binds us here. The tower groaned as though something massive had stirred above. And for the first time, I realized finding Sophie was only the beginning. The spiral ramp trembled beneath my boots, dust sifting down from the stone ceiling. Sophie's warning clung to the air like smoke, the guardian. I knelt at her cell, my hands gripping the cold bars. Up close, I saw the battle happening in her eyes. Brown flickers struggling against the creeping black, her jaw clenched as if she were holding something monstrous inside. "I can get you out," I whispered. She shook her head, her breath ragged. "No. The key, the Guardian of Wrath keeps it. He sits on the throne at the top of the tower. He doesn't give it freely. He bargains." Her words shivered through me. "Then I'll bargain." "You don't understand." Her voice cracked, shifting between her own and something not hers. "He's older than the church. Older than hell as we name it. You can't outweed him. You can only feed him." Before I could answer, the tower shook again, this time not from her, but from above. A sound rolled down the spiral like distant thunder. Heavy footsteps. Chains rattling. And then a voice. "The Father comes." It was so deep the stones themselves seemed to carry it. Sophie slammed her palms against the bars, frantic. "Dad, don't." But I was already climbing, my legs carrying me upward even as my heart screamed to turn back. The cells grew worse the higher I went. Murderers gave way to torturers, torturers to tyrants. Each level more poisonous than the last, their rage thickening the air. Some pressed their faces to the bars and spat curses in languages long dead. Others laughed, hollow and broken. All of them whispered one word as I passed: wrath. At last, the spiral opened into a wide chamber. And he was there. The Guardian of Wrath sat on a throne made of weapons, spears, swords, rifles, even bones sharpened to blades, fused together into a jagged crown of iron and fire. He was immense, easily 8 feet tall, his skin molten metal that glowed at the seams like a forge. His eyes were not black like the other souls. They were fire itself, twin furnaces that seared when they fixed on me. He leaned forward, the throne groaning under his weight. In his fist gleamed a key rod of black iron, its surface shimmering with heat. "The Father comes for the daughter." His voice was an avalanche, crushing everything beneath it. How touching. How useless. "Let her go," I said. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. She killed one of mine. A priest of Rome. She chose violence. Violence binds her to me. Sophie's words pierced me. I killed him. I hit him until he stopped moving. It hadn't been paranoia. It had been blood. She was influenced. I shouted. Hell twisted her. That wasn't her choice. The Guardian stood, towering over me. Flames licked between the cracks in his skin. Choice or influence, the blood is hers. She belongs here now. My hands curled into fists. Then bargain. Name your price. He raised the key, and the chamber flared red. Combat. Prove your wrath is greater than mine. Defeat me, and the girl walks free. Fail, and you both remain. Forever. The air before me shimmered, and a weapon materialized at my feet. A sword, ordinary steel, worn but sharp. Its weight felt good in my hands, heavier than I remembered steel being, hungrier. The Guardian's own weapon was no sword of men. He lifted a massive blade carved of fire itself, edges dripping sparks that hissed where they struck the stone. We circled each other, predator and prey, though I wasn't sure which one I was. The Guardian swung first. A downward arc meant to split me in two. I leapt aside, the blade cracking stone where I'd just stood. The heat seared my cheek, blinding for a moment. I countered, slashing at his side, but the steel bounced off molten skin without leaving so much as a mark. His laugh was thunder. Your anger is weak. You fight like a scholar, not a killer. And he was right. My strikes were precise, careful, trained in academic sparring halls where the worst consequence was a bruise. But this wasn't academia. This was my daughter's soul at stake. I thought of Sophie in her cell, eyes going black. I thought of her terrified voice on the voicemail. I thought of the Vatican's silence, their secrets, their willingness to let her die. Rage welled up, hot and raw, not scholarly but paternal. Not technique, but grief sharpened into fury. I roared and attacked, abandoning precision. I swung wild, each strike fed by the months of hollow silence since Sophie's death, by every sleepless night replaying those 37 seconds of breathing. Sparks flew as steel met molten skin. and for the first time, the guardian staggered. Black blood hissed from a cut across his chest. His grin faltered. "Better," he rumbled. He lashed out, grabbing my blade in one molten fist. The steel hissed, bending under his grip. With his other hand, he swung his fire sword, the arc wide, devastating. I ducked, rolled, came up slashing. My steel carved into his side. He roared, the sound shaking the chamber, and for an instant his flames dimmed. "You cannot defeat wrath with wrath," he bellowed. And then something inside me shifted. He was right. Wrath was his domain. I could never match it. But what burned in me wasn't just anger, it was love. I tightened my grip, twisted the sword still buried in his ribs, and hissed through clenched teeth, "I'm not fighting with wrath. I'm fighting with love." The blade sank deeper, cutting something vital. The guardian froze, his fire flickering out like dying embers. His massive body crashed to the stone floor, molten skin cooling to ash. The black iron key slipped from his grip, clattering across the stone. I staggered forward and picked it up, my body trembling, my arms weak from the fight. But my hand closed around the key like it had been waiting for me all along. Below, I heard Sophie scream. The scream ripped through the tower, shaking the air like a physical force. It wasn't just Sophie's voice, it was layered, threaded with something older, darker, like 100 other throats screamed with her at once. I clutched the iron key tighter and forced my shaking legs down the spiral. The imprisoned souls clawed at their bars as I passed, their voices a storm, "Free us! Free us! Free us!" Their black eyes followed me, hungry and pleading, but I kept going. My daughter was all that mattered. When I reached her level, she was crouched against the bars of her cell, hands over her ears. The scream had died down, but her body trembled with its aftershocks. Her eyes flickered between brown and black like a broken light bulb. I fell to my knees before her. "Sophie. It's me. I've got the key." Her gaze lifted slowly. For a heartbeat, the black receded, and I saw my little girl again, the one who used to fall asleep with history books open on her chest, who laughed too loud in libraries, who called me 3 times the night she died. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice cracked, brittle. "You shouldn't be here. You gave him what he wanted." I shoved the key into the lock. "I didn't give him anything. I beat him." The iron turned, hot as a stove under my hand, and the door swung open with a shriek that made the whole tower tremble. Sophie stumbled forward, collapsing into my arms. She felt solid, real, but her skin was cold as winter stone. "How?" she asked weakly. I held her tight. Not with wrath. With love. Her laugh was half a sob, half a cough, but it was hers. I pulled her up, slinging her arm over my shoulder. Together, we staggered down the ramp, past cells that howled in fury. The other souls beat their bars, shrieking for release, their hunger gnawing at the edges of my mind. One whispered directly into my ear, though I wasn't close enough to touch him, "Free me instead. Leave her. She's marked." I ignored them and kept moving. The courtyard outside was chaos. The two armies still hacked at each other, Roman shields slamming against Visigoth axes, bodies falling only to rise again seconds later. But the guardians who had stood at the tower entrance were gone. The throne above had kept them anchored, with it gone, the order here fractured into pure carnage. We darted between the battles, Sophie clinging to me. She was fading fast, her weight heavier than it should have been. I realized then that her soul wasn't fully hers yet. The black still curled in her eyes, pulling her back toward the tower with every step. By the time we reached the blood river, I was nearly dragging her. My boots splashed in the sticky crimson at the shore as I shouted into the mist, "Ferryman! Passage!" For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the bone boat glided from the fog, steady as before. The ferryman's obsidian form towered over us. His grinding voice slid through me like knives. "Two souls wish passage." "She's not a soul," I said quickly. "She's alive. She doesn't owe you." The ferryman tilted his head, the absence of features unreadable. "She has already paid. Blood for blood. Her debt is settled." My chest loosened. "Then what about me?" 10 years. The words hit harder than any blow the guardian had landed. I staggered back. 10. I already gave 4. 4 for crossing, the ferryman intoned. 10 for returning with the dead. 14 years, father of Sophie. Paid in flesh. Paid in time. I looked at her, my daughter, pale and shivering, still fighting the black that curled at the edges of her soul. She met my eyes, tears welling. No, she whispered. Don't. You've already given too much. But I had decided the moment I stepped into the well. Deal, I said. The ferryman extended one hand, skeletal and black as void. I touched it, and the world drained from me. It wasn't just years stolen, it was vitality. My joints burned, my breath shortened, my chest ached like I'd been carrying centuries. I felt my skin sag, my bones weaken. When I caught my reflection in the river's surface, I saw gray in my beard that hadn't been there, wrinkles carved deep around my eyes. 14 years. Gone. The debt is paid, the ferryman said. The boat carried us across. The river churned beneath, things writhing in the blood, brushing against the hull with grotesque thuds. Sophie held my hand the whole way, her grip weak but desperate, as though afraid I'd vanish before we reached the other side. When the boat touched the stone pier, I half carried her back through the tunnels. The 3 lost souls we'd met at the threshold stood waiting. Relief broke across their hollow faces when they saw us. You brought her back, the soldier whispered, awe in his voice. But Marie's eyes narrowed, and she said quietly, at what cost? I didn't answer. We staggered up the spiraling steps, through the church basement, and finally into the faint glow of dawn. Rome was waking. Tourists would soon fill the streets, buying postcards, sipping coffee, oblivious that beneath their feet hell breathed. Beside me, Sophie drew in a shuddering breath. Her eyes were brown again. Fully, completely brown. She was alive. The light of dawn hit Sophie's face, soft and golden, and for a moment I could almost believe none of it had happened. She leaned against me, shivering, her skin warming slowly, like frost melting in the sun. But when I looked at my reflection in the church's broken glass window, I saw what it had cost. My beard was streaked with gray. Deep lines ran across my face. I looked closer to 60 than 48. My hands shook with the ache of age that hadn't been there yesterday. 14 years stolen, not metaphorical, not symbolic. Gone. We walked through Rome in silence. The city was alive with chatter, with clattering dishes from cafes, with the shuffle of tourists who would never know what slept beneath their feet. Sophie stayed close, her arm hooked into mine, but her eyes kept drifting away, toward shadows, toward the spaces between buildings, as though she half expected something to emerge and drag her back. Back at my apartment, she brewed coffee with trembling hands. The rich smell filled the air, grounding me in something ordinary. She sat across from me at the small kitchen table, staring at her cup like it might explain everything. Finally, she spoke. Dad. I killed him. Her voice cracked, the words trembling. I didn't answer right away. The priest, she whispered. Father Touretti. He was following me. He said the church had to protect its secrets, that I couldn't keep the map. He grabbed me when I tried to leave. I panicked. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the mug. I hit him with the tire iron. Over and over until he stopped moving. Her eyes brimmed, desperate. That's why the guardian claimed me. That's why I belonged there. I reached across the table and gripped her wrist. Her pulse was weak but steady. Hell doesn't decide who you are. It only exaggerates what's already inside you. You were scared, cornered. You reacted. Does that excuse it? Her eyes searched mine, brown but haunted, as though the black still lurked behind them. No, I said softly. But it explains it. And explanations are all we can live with. We sat in silence, the weight of unspoken truths pressing between us. She had been willing to go to hell itself for knowledge, for proof. She was my daughter in that way, cursed with the same need to uncover what others left buried. And that need had nearly destroyed her. 3 days later, there was a knock at my door. I expected police. Or worse, Vatican security come to bury the mess. Instead, I opened it to find a thin man in his 60s. His hair was silver, his eyes tired, the black robes of a priest hanging from narrow shoulders. In his hand, a leather briefcase. Dr. Harrison. His voice was weary, careful. I am Father Rodriguez. Vatican Special Archives. Sophie appeared behind me in the doorway. She froze, pale. Rodriguez gave a small nod, his gaze sharp. We need to talk. I stepped aside because I already knew there was no refusing. If the Vatican wanted us gone, we'd already be gone. The fact that Rodriguez stood here meant something else entirely. We sat him down in the living room. Sophie lingered on the couch beside me, her knuckles white against her knees. Rodriguez opened his briefcase and slid a manila folder onto the coffee table. Photographs spilled out, grainy surveillance shots of the church basement, the well, even fragments of the blood river and the city across it. My stomach turned. You knew, I said. Rodriguez's face didn't flinch. The church has always known. We guard the entrances, catalog the maps, monitor activity. But no one has descended as far as you and returned with their soul intact. He turned his gaze to Sophie, and something like awe flickered in his eyes. You were claimed, and yet you came back whole. That has never happened before. Sophie shifted uneasily. You were watching me. Father Toretti was assigned to monitor your research. When you drew too close, he intervened. Rodriguez's voice softened. Hell has a way of twisting judgment. His role was to slow you, not to die. Her face crumpled. I killed him for nothing. Rodriguez studied her with an expression I couldn't read. Pity, perhaps. Or calculation. Then he spread another set of documents across the table, police reports, missing persons, clippings from newspapers across Europe. Every year, a handful of people vanish near the entrances. Some stumble too close by accident. Others find fragments of the maps and descend willingly. Most never return. A few change. He leaned forward, his voice a whisper. The church needs people who can navigate hell and come back. You've done what others could not. That makes you dangerous and valuable. Silence stretched. The air seemed to hum with the weight of it. Rodriguez closed the folder, his tired eyes locking on mine. Help us contain this. Or walk away and pray those doors don't open wider than they already have. Sophie's hand slipped into mine. Her grip was cold, but steady. We already knew our answer. Rodriguez's words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. Help us contain this, or walk away. I stared at him across the coffee table, his manila folders spread like an autopsy of secrets. Sophie sat rigid beside me, her breathing shallow. She looked so young still, but in her eyes I saw the weight of someone who had walked in places no living person should. You make it sound like we have a choice, I said finally. You do, Rodriguez replied evenly. But only one of them keeps you alive. It was a threat, but it wasn't empty. If the Vatican wanted us silenced, they'd already done it. Instead, they had sent this thin, exhausted priest to my living room with photos of hell spread across my coffee table. That meant they wanted something else. What exactly are you asking us to do? I asked. Rodriguez folded his hands. Descend again. Not aimlessly, strategically. We need maps, confirmation of what circles look like now, and recovery of certain anomalies. More importantly, we need retrieval. There are those who wander in without sanction. Tourists, scholars, even children of Rome who stumble too far in the catacombs. The church cannot let them remain. Sophie's jaw tightened. You want us to play shepherds? Rescuing people who don't even know what they walked into. Yes. Rodriguez's gaze didn't waver. Because most of our agents do not come back. You did. That makes you unique. I could hear Sophie's heartbeat in the silence that followed. Rodriguez leaned forward and tapped the folder. But there is another reason. Knowledge. Every descent feeds it. Every translation of the maps, every attempt to interpret them, it destabilizes the boundary. The more people who learn, the thinner the veil grows. You have seen it yourselves. The entrances are restless. And what happens when it breaks? I asked. Rodriguez's face was grave. Then hell comes to us. The words landed heavy, inevitable. After he left, Sophie and I sat in silence, the photographs still strewn across the table. The coffee between us had gone cold. Finally, Sophie whispered, "We can't walk away, can we?" I shook my head. If we walk away, others keep falling in. And no one brings them back. She pressed her palms against her face, trembling. "Dad, I almost didn't come back. I can still feel it, hell pulling at me. It doesn't let go. If we go again, if we keep going." Her voice broke. "What if one day I don't come back at all?" I reached across the table and took her hands. They were still cold, but steady now. "Then I'll go with you. Every time. Until the end." For the first time since her death, since her almost death, her eyes filled with tears that weren't black. She nodded slowly. We gave Rodriguez our answer 2 days later. He looked neither pleased nor surprised, only weary, as though he had already known the outcome. The training began immediately. The Vatican moved us into a compound outside Rome, one that didn't appear on any map. There, Sophie and I learned things we had never imagined we would need: combat drills, supernatural first aid, demon taxonomy, survival in non-Earth environments. We studied maps not of oceans or mountains, but of circles, rivers, fortresses, prisons. Hell, it turned out, was not chaos. It was organized. Structured. Governed by rulers who had shaped it across centuries. Some circles were endless battlefields, others bureaucracies of torment. Each had rules, laws, bargains, and punishments. And all of them were hungry. Rodriguez oversaw our training personally. His voice was calm, his eyes always tired. But sometimes, just sometimes, I caught him watching Sophie with something like awe. 2 months in, the call came. A graduate student from Florence had vanished. She had been tracing medieval pilgrimage routes and stumbled across references to a sealed door beneath San Lorenzo. By the time campus security found her notes, she was already gone. Rodriguez slid the file across the table. "Your first mission." The weight of it was suffocating. Sophie looked at me, her expression tight. I nodded once. We descended together, armed with Vatican-issued gear more advanced than anything Sophie had prepared for her own attempt: radio beacons, warded compasses, weapons designed to disrupt entities. And once again, we walked where no living souls should walk. We found the student in the circle of greed, trapped in a maze of mirrors that showed her endless wealth, endless success, always out of reach. She had been wandering for weeks, chasing phantoms. Her eyes were nearly black by the time we reached her. It took hours of careful words to convince her to turn away from the illusions. Hours of reminding her what was real: her studies, her life, her family. At last, she whispered that she wanted to go home, and the maze dissolved. She didn't remember what happened when we brought her back. But she was alive. And we, Sophie and I, had gone down again. And returned. The Vatican called it a success. A clean retrieval. One life saved, one family spared the grief I knew too well. The student was back in Florence within a week, her memories hazy but intact enough to resume her studies. She would never know she had wandered the circle of greed for weeks, whispering to illusions. But for Sophie and me, it wasn't clean. It never could be. Back in the compound, we lay awake in our quarters long after the lights dimmed. Sophie stared at the ceiling, her voice thin in the dark. "Did you see them?" she whispered. I knew what she meant. The other souls. "Yes," I said. "They called out to me. Begged me. Some even knew my name. She broke off, swallowing hard. "Dad, I don't think they forget. I think they wait." I reached over and took her hand. Her skin was warmer now, more alive than the day I had pulled her from the Tower of Wrath. But I could still feel a tremor beneath it, as though hell had left its pulse in her veins. "We can't save everyone," I said quietly. "I know." Her voice was flat. "But I still hear them." We didn't speak after that. The silence was heavy, filled with the phantom echoes of voices neither of us could silence. Over the next 8 months, we completed 17 more missions. We pulled tourists from the catacombs who had slipped into circles they were never meant to see. We retrieved a Vatican priest who had been researching heresy and ended up trapped in a chamber where voices whispered every false gospel at once. We found a man in the circle of lust who no longer remembered his own name, lost to illusions so grotesque we couldn't look directly at them. Not every rescue was successful. Some had been underground too long, their humanity burned out of them. Some refused to leave, insisting hell was where they belonged. And some we found too late, empty shells, their souls already claimed. But more often than not, we succeeded. 18 people. 18 souls walking on the surface again because Sophie and I refused to let them rot in the dark. And yet, each descent took something. The price wasn't always obvious. It wasn't always years ripped from my life like the ferryman's toll. Sometimes it was just exhaustion that clung too long, or dreams that twisted into visions of rivers of blood, or the way Sophie's eyes would darken in sleep, a flicker of black still hiding there. And sometimes it was worse. Rodriguez briefed us monthly. His words grew heavier each time. Activity at the entrances is increasing, he told us one night, sliding charts and photographs across the table. Jagged lines, seismic readings, footage of shadows writhing at the mouths of tunnels. More demons attempting to reach the surface. More souls trying to escape. The boundaries grow weaker. Sophie frowned, her lips tight. Why? Rodriguez's eyes, always tired, looked older than ever. Knowledge. The more people learn about the maps, the more the entrances fray. Ignorance strengthens the barrier. Curiosity erodes it. I stared at the photos, at the trembling graphs that seemed to pulse like heartbeats. So every mission, every descent adds pressure, Rodriguez finished. The silence that followed was suffocating. So we're making it worse, Sophie said finally. Her voice cracked. We're saving people, but we're tearing the veil wider every time we step through. Rodriguez didn't argue. He only said, the alternative is to leave them. To let them rot. I looked at Sophie then. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She was thinner, paler, her eyes lined with shadows too deep for her age. But she looked back at me with the same stubbornness she had always carried, the same need to know, to do something, even when the cost was unbearable. Later, when we were alone, she whispered, we're damming a flood with paper. I didn't disagree. That night, long after she had fallen asleep, I sat awake with Sophie's old map spread across my lap. The vellum still smelled faintly of dust and rot, the ink faded but legible. 7 doors, it said. 7 points where the world was thinnest. 6 marked sealed. 1 still open. But what chilled me wasn't the doors. It was the margin notes, scrawled in Sophie's hurried hand. The seals weaken with knowledge. The seals break with use. At the bottom of the page, in ink pressed so hard it nearly tore the parchment. If the doors all open at once, the world will not survive it. I sat there in the quiet, the map trembling in my hands, and understood the truth. We weren't just rescuing people. We were racing against a collapse that might already have begun. The realization haunted me, worse than the nightmares, worse than the toll the ferryman had taken. Every descent, every rescue, every whisper of knowledge spread like cracks through the foundation of the world. Sophie and I weren't just helping people, we might be accelerating the end. I tried to bury it, but Sophie noticed. She always did. You're quieter, she said one morning over weak Vatican coffee. She looked at me across the table, her eyes searching, brown but still carrying a faint shadow that never left. What aren't you telling me? I slid the map toward her, my finger pressing down on her own frantic note, the seals weaken with knowledge. The seals break with use. Her face drained of color. She whispered, so every time we go down. We make it worse, I finished. Silence swallowed the room. Outside, bells tolled faintly from some distant Roman church. Then Sophie straightened. Her voice was sharp, stubborn, the same tone she'd used as a child when she decided to memorize entire medieval chronicles in a week. Then we stop patching the dam. We find a way to fix it. I frowned. Fix it. She tapped the margin of the map, where the monks who'd drawn it had written symbols even she hadn't fully translated. The seals were created once. Which means they can be created again. Or strengthened. There has to be a way. The idea was madness. Closing one door was impossible enough. closing all 7. Permanently. But Sophie's eyes burned with the same determination that had pulled her into hell in the first place. And I realized, she wasn't asking. She was already decided. For weeks we dug through archives deeper than anything I'd seen in my career. Rodriguez granted us access to documents so classified they were stored in vaults beneath the Vatican itself. Dust-covered ledgers, forgotten papal decrees, fragments of grimoires bound in cracked leather. Patterns emerged. References to an abandoned project called Final Seal, dating back to 1823. It had been attempted once, then buried, too dangerous, too costly. The requirements were staggering. Simultaneous rituals at all 7 entrances. Sacred artifacts collected across centuries. And, most damning of all, human guardians willing to remain behind at each entrance, tethering their lives to the seals so they would hold. 7 lives for 7 doors. When we read it, Sophie's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. We could do it. We could seal Rome's entrance. If others do the same. And if they don't? I cut in. If one door stays open, the strain could rupture all of them. The collapse would come faster. Her jaw set. Then we convinced them. Rodriguez wasn't surprised when we brought him the research. If anything, his shoulders sagged, as though he'd been waiting for us to find it. The church debated Final Seal for generations, he said softly. Some argued it was mercy. Others argued it was hubris. To trap every soul in hell forever, even those who might be redeemed, he trailed off. It was easier to do nothing. And now? Sophie pressed. His eyes closed briefly. Now. It may be the only way. The following months blurred into preparation. The Vatican mobilized quietly, reaching across continents to ready teams at the 6 other entrances. Artifacts were retrieved from hidden reliquaries. Prayers were memorized in Latin no one spoke anymore. Sophie and I moved into the basement of St. Joseph of the Carpenters, our lives now tethered to the well that had nearly swallowed her. The nights were the worst. In the hours before dawn, when the city above was hushed, we would hear it, the faint hum of the well. Sometimes whispers. Sometimes scraping, like claws on stone. Once, I swore I heard my name breathed up from the dark. Sophie heard them too. But she no longer flinched. She would sit at the edge, staring into the black, her face pale in the emergency lights. They know, she whispered once. They know we're trying to close the door. Then we'd better succeed, I said. The day came in November. 7 entrances. 7 guardians. 7 lives given over to vigilance. The ritual itself was deceptively simple. Sophie and I stood on opposite sides of the well, each holding a relic that glowed faintly in the dark. Our voices joined in Latin, words that tasted like ash, words that bent the air until it shimmered like heat waves. The well fought back. Darkness rose like smoke, thick and suffocating. The whispers became screams. For one heart-stopping moment, the seal buckled, and I thought we'd failed. Then the blackness hardened, thickened, and closed. The well was no longer a passage. It was a wall. Sophie sagged against me, exhausted. My chest heaved, my breath ragged. But it was done. Hell was sealed. We've been here 6 months now. The Vatican calls us guardians, though it feels more like wardens. Our lives are quiet, almost normal, books, chess games, reports filed every night. Rome bustles above us, unaware. But sometimes, when the lights flicker, I swear I hear them. The soldier from Antietam, still waiting. Marie from the Revolution. Yeppie from the plague years. Souls who will never come home now, because of what we chose. I tell myself we saved more than we lost. I tell myself 14 years was worth it to see Sophie alive. And most nights, I believe it. But then the well hums, just faintly, like something still breathing on the other side. And I wonder if we sealed hell away, or just locked ourselves in with it. The Vatican tells us we should feel pride. That we are the guardians of humanity now, the silent watchmen at the gates of hell. Every report I send is answered with polite gratitude, sometimes even blessings from men who will never set foot near the places Sophie and I have walked. But pride is not what fills the nights down here. It's the silence. The kind that presses in, too thick, too heavy. The kind that makes you wonder if the seal is holding because the darkness has gone quiet, or because it's waiting. Sophie has adapted better than I have. She throws herself into routines, cataloging, studying every relic left in our care, building schedules down to the hour. She laughs sometimes, brittle but real, over games of chess we both pretend to care about. She hums when she cooks, soft little tunes she used to hum as a child. But sometimes, when she thinks I'm not watching, I see her pause at the edge of the sealed well. Her lips move as if whispering back to something only she can hear. When I ask, she denies it. But her eyes are too dark, even when they stay brown. 3 months after the sealing, Rodriguez visited. He looked thinner than before, his face more hollow. There's been complications, he admitted, lowering his voice as though the stone walls might eavesdrop. Reports of disturbances. Shadows in churches near other sealed entrances. Objects shifting. Bells ringing at night with no one to ring them. The seals are failing. I asked. Not failing, he said carefully. But straining. Final seal was always theoretical. Permanent containment requires permanent sacrifice. You and Sophie are here. The others, some are wavering. My blood ran cold. They want to leave. Rodriguez hesitated, then nodded. One already has. The room tilted around me. If even one seal collapsed, it could unspool the others. Sophie's voice was quiet but sharp. Then replace them. Find others. Rodriguez's gaze flicked toward her. It's not so simple. The bond forms with the one who seals it. If they abandon their post, the entrance doesn't just reopen, it tears wider. We cannot replace them. Then what happens? I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, Sophie confronted me. They won't hold, she said flatly. Her voice shook with restrained fury. We gave everything, our lives, our years, our future, and still it's not enough. 1 weak link and the doors rip open again. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to tell her our sacrifice mattered, that the world was safer because of us. But the truth sat heavy on my chest. She was right. She turned her face toward the sealed well, her profile lit faintly by the emergency light. Dad, what if sealing wasn't enough? What if the only way to stop this is to destroy it completely? The thought terrified me. Destroy hell. Or cut it off from us forever. Her voice was steady, too steady. Not just seals. Annihilation. I gripped her arm, too tightly. That isn't our choice to make. She looked at me then, and for the briefest second her eyes flickered, not black this time, but red, as if reflecting a fire burning just beneath her skin. She whispered, maybe it already is. Lately, the whispers have returned. Not faint anymore. Stronger. Clearer. Sometimes I hear Sophie's name. Sometimes my own. Sometimes words I don't know but somehow understand. And sometimes, late at night, when Sophie sits too long at the edge of the well, I think I see shapes moving behind her. Not shadows. Hands. I don't know how long the seals will hold. I don't know if what we've done has saved the world or doomed it. But I do know this. The Vatican believes Sophie and I are its guardians. Its heroes. But I've seen her eyes flicker red in the dark. And I'm starting to wonder if I saved my daughter. Or brought hell back with her. I've started keeping a journal. Not because I expect anyone to read it, if the Vatican finds it, they'll bury it with the rest of their secrets. But because I need something to anchor me. Writing has always been the only way I can force the chaos in my head into order. The entries began simple. Observations about the seal. Notes on the faint vibrations in the floor, the subtle shifts in temperature. But lately, my handwriting has changed. It looks less like mine and more like Sophie's when she was rushing, her pen digging into the paper until it nearly tore. Some mornings, I wake to find entire passages written in Latin I don't remember learning. Verses I half recognize from texts we catalogued in sublevel C, only twisted. Warnings that read more like invitations. The door does not close. The door remembers. Every seal is a promise. Every promise must break. I don't remember writing those. Sophie's worse. She still hums while she cooks, but the tunes are wrong now, sliding, atonal melodies that twist like broken hymns. At night, I hear her whispering in her sleep. At first, it was just words: blood, path, return. But 2 nights ago, I woke to her sitting upright on the cot, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Her lips moved steadily, reciting something in a voice that wasn't hers. When I touched her shoulder, she snapped awake. Her eyes were brown again. She didn't remember. But the echo of her other voice still crawled in my ears. Rodriguez visited last week. He looked older, gaunt, as though every descent he'd overseen had carved years from him too. He said little, but when he left, Sophie muttered under her breath, "He smells like ash." I asked her what she meant. She blinked at me, confused. Said she hadn't spoken. But I heard it. Clear as my own thoughts. The seal hums louder now. It doesn't sound like stone straining anymore. It sounds like a heartbeat. Sometimes it matches mine. Sometimes Sophie's. And sometimes, when we're both silent, it beats on its own. I've tried to convince myself it's imagination. That years of study in damp archives have warped my senses. That hell doesn't breathe. But yesterday, I stood too close to the well, and I swear something exhaled. The air was hot, metallic, and wet against my face. Sophie confessed something tonight. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the buzzing light. "Dad, I don't think I came back alone." She wouldn't look at me when she said it. Her hands twisted in her lap, knuckles white. Sometimes I see things in mirrors. Behind me. Sometimes I think I hear footsteps, even when you're asleep. And sometimes, when I speak, I feel words forming that aren't mine. I tried to tell her it wasn't real. That trauma leaves marks. That she'd been through more than anyone should. But as I said it, her eyes flickered again, red, faint, but undeniable. She saw my face and started to cry. "Dad," she whispered, "what if I'm the open door now?" I held her until she slept, but I didn't sleep after. I sat awake with the map in my lap, the ink crawling under my gaze like it was still wet. Her handwriting was there in the margins, even though she hadn't touched it since we sealed the well. One seal closed. One door opened. I stared at it until dawn. And I knew, hell doesn't lose. It trades. The Vatican calls once a week now. Not Rodriguez, others. Voices I don't recognize. They ask the same questions every time: is the seal intact? Are there disturbances? Has your daughter shown any changes? I lie. I tell them the seal holds. That we're fine. That Sophie sleeps, eats, studies. Because if I told them the truth, that her eyes flicker red in the dark, that sometimes her voice echoes with something not her own, they wouldn't send help. They'd send executioners. And I can't lose her again. 2 nights ago, I woke to find Sophie standing at the sealed well. No light, no sound but her breathing. She was barefoot, her nightgown brushing the stone floor. Her hand hovered just above the surface of the seal. The blackness shimmered faintly beneath her palm, as though it was reaching back. "Sophie," I whispered. She turned slowly, her eyes wide open, glossy, unfocused. "Dad," she said, but her voice was layered. Her tone beneath, and something deeper over it, like 2 voices speaking in unison. "They're still calling." I stepped closer. "From the other side?" She nodded once, mechanically. "They're asking me to let them out. Not demons. People. Souls. They beg, Dad. They scream. I can't shut them out." Her knees buckled. I caught her before she hit the floor. She sobbed into my chest like a child, shaking so hard I thought she might break. "They say I belong to them. That I left part of myself behind." I whispered the only lie I could. "No. You're here. You're whole." But in the silence that followed, I swear I heard whispers pressing against the seal. And one of them spoke my name. Rodriguez returned yesterday. He looked worse than ever, his face hollow, his hands trembling. "We may have made a mistake," he admitted. His voice was quiet, but his eyes were wild, like a man who had seen too much. The seals, they don't just contain hell. They tether it. Binding it tighter to us. Closer. Sophie stiffened beside me. You mean we didn't close the door? We pulled it closer. Rodriguez didn't answer, but his silence was enough. That night, I dreamed of the Guardian of Wrath. His molten face looming over me, his voice an avalanche. You did not win. You bargained. Love or wrath, it makes no difference. You opened yourself. You are both mine now. I woke drenched in sweat, my sword arm aching as though I had fought for hours. And in the corner of the room, Sophie sat awake, staring at me. Her eyes were red. She smiled faintly, almost apologetically. I dreamed it too. I don't know how long we can hold this lie. The Vatican believes we sealed hell. The city above sleeps, oblivious. But every day, the whispers grow clearer. The seal hums louder. And Sophie. Sophie is changing. She laughs at odd times now, at things I don't say. She corrects me in languages she never studied. Sometimes, when she thinks I'm not watching, she writes symbols on scraps of paper, the same sigils carved into the well's rim. I burn them every time. But still, more appear. Tonight, as I write this, she's humming again. That broken hymn, the one that coils into places music shouldn't reach. And I realize I've been wrong about one thing all along. Hell doesn't need to break its way out. It just needed a door. And my daughter is already open. I don't know how much longer I can keep this record. My hands shake too badly now, my skin sags like I've aged another decade in just weeks. 14 years gone wasn't the end, it was only the down payment. Every night I hear the ferryman's voice echo in my skull, the debt is never finished. Sophie doesn't look at me the same way anymore. When she does, her eyes flicker brown, then red, then black, as though three selves wrestle for control. Sometimes she smiles gently, the way she did as a child when she'd fall asleep at her desk with ink smudges on her face. Other times, the smile twists into something I don't recognize, sharp, knowing, cruel. Last night she said something that froze me. Dad, do you ever wonder if Mom is down there? I opened my mouth to answer, but she kept going, her voice smooth, calm, almost kind. I could bring her back for you. I know the way. I know all the ways now. Her hand rested lightly on the table, but her nails had lengthened, black at the tips. The seal in the basement throbbed in time with her words, like it agreed. I told her no. I told her never. She only smiled again, but this time it wasn't hers at all. Rodriguez hasn't returned. The phone calls stopped 3 weeks ago. I think the Vatican already knows we've lost control, and they're deciding what to do with us. Eliminate us, maybe. Or worse, send others to take our place. It won't matter. The seal hums day and night now, louder, louder, like a heart straining against a cage. The walls shake sometimes. Lights flicker. Once, I saw dust falling from the ceiling in rhythmic pulses, as though something beneath was breathing hard, impatient. This morning, I woke to find Sophie gone. Panic seized me. I stumbled through the church basement, my chest on fire, joints aching with borrowed age. I found her at the seal. Kneeling. Both palms pressed flat against the black surface. Her lips moved steadily, whispering in a tongue older than any language I know. The air shimmered around her, rippling like heat. Sophie! I shouted. She turned. Her eyes weren't brown anymore. Not even red. They were fire. And when she spoke, I heard her voice layered with another, deeper and endless. You should not have followed me, Father. But since you did, you will watch the door open. I staggered back, my heart collapsing under the weight of her words. Because I understood, finally, I hadn't rescued my daughter from hell. I had carried hell out with her. The seal pulses louder now, so loud I feel it in my teeth, in my bones. Sophie, whatever she is now, sits beside it, humming that broken hymn, her firelit eyes never leaving me. I write this because I have to leave a record for someone, anyone, who finds this place after we're gone. We thought we sealed hell. We thought we bought the world time. But hell doesn't close. It only trades. And my daughter was the bargain. If anyone reads this, stay away from St. Joseph of the Carpenters. Burn the church if you can. Collapse it into the earth. Don't listen to the voices if they call you by name. And whatever you do, don't believe her when she tells you she can bring someone back. Because she can. And she will.